Hey guys, sorry this is coming so late. I'm going to try to respond to the video of the chat you guys did. I don't know if you can tell, I'm still really sick. So yeah, I was a little confused this week about what was due, and I was kind of in and out of it with fevers and stuff. So I apologize for not being in the talk. Um, so I made some notes while watching the Collaborate session, so I could kind of insert my 2 cents in different things you were talking about. The first thing I want to do is I know I've told you guys before, I teach at a private Jewish school, so I've been working. I've really worked with every age group from infants to 8th grade. I teach 7th and 8th grade business. And I'm doing my observation with 5th grade. Last year I worked in the preschool, and I've subbed every grade in between. I pretty much know everyone in the school. So I come from a little bit different of a background than you guys in your day-to-day classroom experiences. So one of the first things you guys were talking about was testing in schools as far as comprehension. I'm very thankful that I don't really deal with that. We do map testing, but that is the only standardized testing we are required to do, really. So I don't have to worry about, I believe you guys were talking about how you teach to the program that you're supposed to teach to, and then you get the state tests, and they're testing stuff on things that your kids wouldn't have the background knowledge on because you haven't taught it, because it wasn't required to teach. I thankfully haven't had to deal with that. So about prior knowledge, you guys were talking about cultural issues of prior knowledge and making sure that they are familiar with a wide range of things so that they can access background knowledge, so they can comprehend things that are asked of them on things like state tests and other things like that. I would, and I'm probably not going to hear back from you guys about this, but the question that I would ask is, I have kind of the opposite problem. My students are constantly catered to as far as their culture, because we are a Jewish school. So everything that we do somehow generally ties back in with Judaism and their Jewish culture. So my worry is that they are going to get out into the public school system and into college, and there's going to be a vacuum of background knowledge for them on other things that, I think that some groups, especially minority groups in the public school system, are not necessarily given a fair shake as far as, okay, like for history and English, for instance. In college, I took English literature. That was my literature class. But there weren't other cultures or places represented in those courses. In high school, I'm thinking back, I don't know, most of what we read was written by old white dudes. History, it's mostly American and European history. We don't learn African history. When I got to college, I made a point to take all the Asian history classes because the professor, who was wonderful, was from China. And she got her degree in China, and she came here, and so I got a fantastic understanding. One of the most interesting parts was the relationship between England and China, and the trade and the opium crisis and all those type of things. But to hear it from the perspective of a Chinese scholar rather than one that was from the Western academic system. So with my kids, I worry that, they're so used to their culture being catered to that they're never going to be challenged to understand any other cultures. That's a more overarching question I have about the school system. My daughter goes to school there as well. I try to, and I'm not saying that they ignore other cultures. I'm just saying that because everything is seen through a Jewish lens, that they're going to continue to do that the rest of their life, and that's both a good and a bad thing. As far as comprehension, I actually learned this technique for vocabulary and comprehension from the teacher who was my teacher when I was in school, and I think it is fantastic. When they read books, they read them as a group, and they stop and they reflect on things. So they'll say, okay, so what just happened in these last 2 pages? And the students will talk and discuss and figure out what they think is happening. And sometimes they're completely wrong. And then you have to kind of unpack that and say, okay, well, why do you think that that's what happened? What were the context clues that made you think that this is what's happening? And there's a very safe environment in the 5th grade classroom specifically that I work in. So kids are not afraid to say, well, this is what I think, or I disagree with that. And they're not afraid to be wrong because that's the environment of the classroom. That it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to say, I don't understand. And it normally turns into more of a friendly, academic debate than an argument. So I'm very lucky in that aspect in the classroom. But we stop and we discuss. And this will go into what you guys were discussing later. But that's also how we do vocabulary. We pull vocabulary from the book a lot of the time, and we will discuss the words beforehand. We'll discuss them as they pop up in the text, and then we'll talk about them afterwards. So they're learning them in context, and hopefully in a story that is making an impact on them. So that is, I think, they seem to be a lot more interested in what the words mean than just putting them on the board. If they're trying to figure out what is happening with this character that they're invested in, and there's a word that they don't quite understand, they're far more likely to try to really figure it out rather than just put something down on a note card and go, look, I identified the word, because they want to know what the meaning is. They want to know what's going on. Comprehension. We were reading Island of the Blue Dolphins, which is the story of a native girl who lived on an island. Long story short, all of her people got taken away on boats to go live somewhere else, and she got left behind. And she talks about sea elephants. There was a big discussion in the room about what sea elephants were. Were they manatees? Were they walrus? Were they seals? What were they? We tried looking at the context clues in the text, and it was kind of, still kind of ambiguous as to what they were. So the kids took it upon themselves to research it, and we set aside some time, and they researched it. And ultimately, I had a little bit of guidance in what kind of questions they should be looking to answer. But eventually they figured out, they looked at the habitat for different species they thought it might be. They looked at maps of where those animals live, and they were able to narrow it down and figure out what it was based on that. And activities like that, I think, really help with comprehension. A lot of the things that I'm talking about, I understand, are different than what was previously discussed. Because I think reading comprehension in older grades is a little bit different. You're not just looking for what does this sentence mean on the surface. You're also asking them to understand subtext, and you're asking them to, if you say, the main character's dog dies, right? For a first grader, you'd say, how does that make her feel? And he'd go, well, I think she's probably sad. Even without context clues, that's probably what a first grader would say, because they know that that emotion fits with that thing that's going on. With the fifth graders, we're going to ask them, well, why was she sad? And then you get answers like, well, she was by herself and he was her only friend. And, because now she was alone again, and now she had no one to talk to because she had started befriending animals in place of people, and it had changed her entire belief system about animals and what she ate and the animals that she would hunt, and how she interacted with her world entirely changed based on this friendship. And, asking the fifth graders to dig into that, I feel like they're getting more comprehension from what the author is trying to get forward. So it's a little bit different of a task with older kids, because I want them to pull more out of the text than I would expect of a first or second grade student. You guys were talking about incorporating writing into comprehension and saying, is it good or bad? I like to try to engage material or content in as many different ways as possible. And sometimes that's a hit or miss. The teacher that I'm working with, she used to put up a display when they started the book Island of the Blue Dolphin, and it had, not all of this will make sense, and I'm not going to explain all of it, but it had like different types of jewelry and items that were relevant for the book, and pictures of plants and animals and places and maps and all this kind of stuff that they could actually like see and touch to help them with their connection with the story and being able to visualize it. This year, she decided not to do that. She waited until the book was over to put that up. And one of the great things that we got to see was we would have them do activities like make a poster. Make a poster that relates to the last 2 chapters of this book. And they would be drawing things that they've never seen before, like hunting nets used by Native Americans and spears and the types of houses that they lived in. And a lot of the time it was pretty spot on for what they actually would look like, and they didn't have any visual reference. They were just pulling that from the text. So later, when we finished the book and she put the display up, they were able to compare their posters with real pictures and stuff. And it was really cool to see that, you don't necessarily need all of that, that if they're comprehending the material well, they're pulling all of that information on their own, and you can see that and pull it out of them, and then compare and contrast, which I thought was fantastic. Looking at my notes. So we're talking about a little bit about reading and bringing your own opinions in and making your own conclusions and the thoughts about that. From my opinion is that the highest level of academics is when you have enough background knowledge in different subjects to start bridging. So, being able to understand in a geology classroom the effects that chemistry and physics has on geology without it being spelled out to you. When you sit down and you think about, okay, well, if the water's moving this fast, it's going to move this much sediment, and understanding the physics principles behind that, is when you start getting into higher level academics, because then you can start asking questions. You can start asking real questions that people haven't answered before. So I like to encourage that type of thinking as much as possible to get them used to it. I wasn't really asked to do that much until I got to college. So I think that encouraging that is good. It is, of course, important that you make sure that they're being factual. But, bringing their own opinions or, even minor bridging, I think is great. When you're talking about something in the classroom, they go, oh, that's kind of like this. Or, oh, well, last year we learned this, and this kind of connects. I will always stop and encourage that. So anytime they want to bring something of their own into something, I'm usually very supportive of it, even if it slows us down a little bit or sidetracks us, because ultimately that's the type of critical individual thinking that I want to see my students as adults having. So, part of my teaching philosophy is that our job is to create people that are informed and intelligent and can tell the truth from a lie and know how to research and evaluate sources, because ultimately they're going to be members of society. So aside from the workforce too, they're going to be voting. They're going to be making decisions for their children. Not knowing all the answers, but knowing how to think, I think, is the main goal of education. So I'm always bringing your own opinions in. Yeah, do it. The last thing that I was taking notes on was the fact that you guys were talking about how sometimes, you have students that are behind. I think you said you have students that are at a first or second grade level in fourth grade. I actually have the opposite problem. My students are really far ahead. It's a small class. They're all pretty privileged kids. They're all bright kids. There's not a lot of stressing factors like home situations, except for a few kids. So I've had times when I've come in and we're preparing to do like vocabulary, for instance, and we start putting words down and they're like, okay, we know what all of that means. And you go, okay, well, what does it mean? And they tell you exactly what it means, and they can use it in context. And then you're kind of like, oh, okay, well, my entire lesson now is void because we don't need to do it because you guys are already way ahead of that. So rather than worrying about having to like take time to catch kids up, I have to worry about having challenge activities because even if it's not the whole class, I'm going to have a handful of kids that are like, I already know all of this, and they blaze through it in 2 seconds, and then you have to keep them occupied. I was that kid in school. You know, I'd finish my worksheets in 5 seconds and be like, why are we doing this? This is so simple. And if my teachers didn't have something else to give me to mentally stimulate me, that's when I started acting out. I started getting out of my seat. I started doing things, talking to people, because I wasn't stimulated or challenged. So, yeah, I just want to talk about that a little bit. I thought this was a really interesting collaborate session. I really hate that I wasn't part of it. Sorry for that again. I had a fever all week, and I was really confused this week about what was due. My hope is to upload this video to YouTube and then send the link to my groups and to our professor. Hopefully that will work out. Thank you guys, and I look forward to talking to you guys again.